Tim Talks is back with a special Halloween talk with New York Times bestselling author Blue Balliett. Blue has won the Edgar Allan Poe Award for Best Juvenile Novel, Chicago Tribune Prize for Young Adult Fiction, Chicago Public Library Foundation's 21st Century Award, Agatha Award for Best YA Novel, and among many others. I first know her as the Queen of Nantucket Halloween for her books Nantucket Ghosts and Out of the Wild Night. Hi, Blue.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, everyone. Today I am with, and I'm kind of calling her the Queen of Nantucket Halloween because we need something to look, Nantucket Halloween is going to look a little different. I mean, across the world, Halloween will look a little different this year. So I wanted to bring you readers something special for this week because there may not be a, trick-or-treating or anything. So I am with who I am calling the Queen of Nantucket Halloween, Blue Balliett. And thank you so much for being with me, Blue.
Oh, thank you for sitting down with me, and that's such a lovely intro, and yeah, this is great fun.
So I wanted to start because I was rereading Nantucket Ghosts and Out of the Wild Night just to prep for this talk, and I just love how you write. I feel like every sentence is very thought out. So I thought it would kind of be fun to ask you if you have a sentence that describes the year of 2020.
Okay, I have to begin by telling everybody what I just told you, which is that you sent me a wonderful list of questions, and I wrote some answers down, and they've all evaporated. So all I have is a few little scribbles on a pad, and I've just got to show you how terrible my handwriting is. It is absolutely wild. It looks like a chicken's gone insane. But I was saying on here that 2020 has forced us into an uninvited kind of balance, I think. We've all been forced to accommodate in strange ways. And it's certainly a year that's made all of us take less for granted and kind of forced us to slow down enough to pay much more attention to everyday detail. And that's got its beauty, but this is also a year that has made us long for hugs, for a room full of friends, for travel, for days when a passing sneeze was just that. I often think of that when I'm passing somebody who's sneezing into their mask, and I think, oh my God, remember the days where it wasn't a big deal when somebody sneezed in your ear on a bus or while you were passing them on a street or in the
everyone said, God bless you or bless you. And now it's like they take off running or glare at you like, well, yeah, it is true. It's true. When everything was shut down, it's really just taking for granted the simple things like standing in line at your favorite coffee spot and talking to your barista about like your coffee order. Like that was something that I was like, if I could just go and do that. So it's just interesting.
Exactly. I know those little things that you really odd, sort of in themselves meaningless interactions suddenly seem very precious.
Yeah.
Because we're all so isolated in odd ways.
Yeah. That kind of leads me to the next question, because here we are in a pandemic, which a few years ago, if someone would have told me we would have been dealing with this, I would have thought it was something out of a post-apocalyptic novel. What do you think, what are you most surprised about in our current reality? I think there are some things you and I could have discussed 2 years ago of like, oh, there's a pandemic, what would be happening? Is there something that is happening right now that you are surprised about?
Yeah, I am surprised and impressed by the many ways in which people find hope. And of course, being somebody who loves all kinds of art and has spent a lot of her life trying to make her own art out of words, I'm always interested by how artists react to the goods and the bads in our world. And I think many artists have made the most interesting accommodations and have kind of evolved under the stress of this pandemic. I mean, just as a quick example, the White Heron adaptations done by Mark Shanahan that he did this past summer, which he was working with people who were used to being actors on stage, and he's used to being a producer of dramatic stories. So for him, it was a real evolution, and for everybody else who worked on it. And they all loved doing it once they got into it. And it's something that I never thought would happen with my ghost stories. So that to me is really interesting.
I think they're
Also,
re-airing those this weekend and the next weekend, right? I think I saw that on
I
the.
think so. And they're streaming on the White Heron website. It's pretty wonderful radio drama. They're just beautifully done. So I feel very lucky. They're very professional. Um, and the other thing that the surprise is that all the creative cooking that's gone on, everybody has been forced to make food more important in some way.
Mhm.
And then I think the reaching out between friends and family and the showing care and showing love for other people long distance has had its beauty,
Yeah.
because usually we're all moving so fast and we take each other's presence in our in each other's lives for granted, and suddenly we can't.
Yeah.
Suddenly you can't see someone for months, or you can't get together and have dinner, or you can't say, hey, I'll meet you so and so. So anyway,
Yeah,
it's
some of
nice
my
that
favorite
you're happy.
memories of this year have been these Zoom calls that I've planned with friends that I haven't really spoken with in, 8 years. And it's just like, not a day has gone by and it's just turned into a really fun night. And you didn't even leave your home and you were just catching up with people and asking them about their lives. So it's a plus. It's always good to try and find positives, even when there doesn't seem to be any. So I love that about the hope, because I think we all need a little bit of it right now.
Right. I mean, I think people have discovered they're more buoyant than they thought they were in many ways.
Yes. So let's get to why we're here, which I think is I'm calling it a cult classic, because everyone
I love
I
that.
talked to about this book, they said, this is my friend Lauren just wrote on the Instagram as I posted that I was getting ready for this. She goes, that was my favorite book when I was little. So I think this book means
That's cool.
a lot to people, especially on this island, but even more than that. So I guess my first question is, have you always believed in ghosts?
I certainly have not always believed in ghosts. And it was nothing anyone in my family talked about when I was growing up. Nobody read us ghost stories. It just wasn't a part of our family life. And I never thought about ghosts at all until I was a summer waitress living in a boarding house at Flossie's on India Street when I was 18 and 19. And then I came back one winter. The way Nantucket is, you get sand in your shoes. I was madly in love with it. I couldn't wait to get back. And I brought a friend back with me. It was a couple of years later, and we both saw something really strange. And it was pretty shocking. At first, you just don't trust your own senses. I was completely unprepared for this. In fact, I don't think I told anyone else about what happened for months, and she and I kind of went our own ways. It just was so, there's no place for certain experiences when you're not prepared. I think now if you were to see a ghost on Nantucket, in part because of Nantucket Ghosts and the fact that everybody talks about it, it wouldn't be so surprising. But I was unprepared. Nobody around me was prepared. And then after college, I moved back to Nantucket and I began hearing the occasional ghost story. And that was when I actually was lucky enough to meet the writer Nathaniel Benchley, and he and I were talking about ghosts. And I told him what had happened to me a couple of years before, and he said, oh, yeah. He said, well, I've been out here off and on most of my life. And he said, these stories should be recorded out here. And I'm going to give you an introduction to 3 different people who would not speak with you otherwise. And I will call them, and then you call them and do the interview. So that was the beginning of Nantucket Ghosts. But it was something that I really fell into because of a very strange experience.
So my next question, I was raised Lutheran, and so obviously the afterlife is something that is, it was always a part of my childhood and something. And I guess my question regarding to ghosts is, are believing in ghosts and believing in a religious afterlife mutually exclusive? Do you have to believe in both at the same time?
I don't think so. I mean, religion is such an intensely personal thing too, and when I think about ghosts, I think about something that feels very universal. Ghost stories have been collected and recorded from the beginning of written language in every country in the world. So, stories about visitations from people who are no longer alive in one form or another have been a part of literature and history forever. So, there is something there. And I, I always separate it from religion in my mind, but maybe there doesn't need to be a separation there. It kind of depends on how your faith is structured, I think.
Mm-hmm. So you wrote Ghosts of Nantucket in 1984, and then Nantucket Hauntings in 1990, and then 2006 put them all together into Nantucket Ghosts, which I have in my hands here. So that was quite a while ago, 2006. Have you heard any new ones? And would we ever get another update, do you think?
Well, you certainly could, because wherever I go on the island, it happens to me in the supermarket, it happens to me on the street, it happens to me at parties. I hear stories. People usually want to share, and I think they just know that I'm a very safe ear and I'm genuinely interested. And I would also never do anything to violate their privacy. So I still am hearing stories. And one story and also, when I was collecting the material for Nantucket Ghosts, I heard probably 75 stories. And it boiled down into stories that were different from each other and that could be structured into something longer. But there were many, many things I heard. For instance, there was some kind of a ghost in the kitchen at the Brotherhood. There was something else in the kitchen at Jared Coffin House with pots flying around and this and that. So sometimes the things I heard were very short, and they could be poignant and interesting, but I edited them out because it wasn't enough for an entire tale. And I had so much rich material that had various sides to the story. So, but one thing that has occurred to me that I think I heard this from her years ago and didn't record it because, again, it was so short. But actually, it was Jane Hilst, who's still very much on Nantucket, I think, told me that in the late 70s, she stopped at Consu Springs. She thinks there was another car near her, or a truck, to let a group of people on the women had long skirts, and it was sort of toward the end of the day, and the men had hats. They looked a little odd crossing the street at Consu Springs. And she stopped, and they crossed, and it was a group of 4 or 5 people. They got to the other side, and boom, they were gone. And she just sat there in her car. And if I were to interview her now, if I were to add any material, I would, question her more deeply about who was sitting around her, and did she ever talk to them about it, and what happened after this, where did she put it in her life?
Yeah.
But she said, without a doubt, I wasn't the only person who saw them that day.
Wow.
they were crossing the street, and then boom, they were just gone. I mean, gone in front of all of our eyes. So the variety of stories on Nantucket is fascinating. And I have to say, before the first collection was published, I was nervous about it. I mean, I thought, are people going to think I'm completely nuts? And I had never seen a collection of stories that were presented as oral history, not embellished. And that was very important to me too, to just open the door for these stories and let them walk through on their own as much as possible. And the variety of people that were talking to me was so fascinating. I mean, I often wished that I could have filmed these stories, because when you see someone's face and body language telling you about something that actually happened to them, but something that they don't understand, they're a little nervous about, they just have no place for it in everyday life. That's fascinating to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I felt privileged to be there.
It reads so uniquely because it is such an oral. I mean, you really feel like you are reading their story. You did such a good job of taking all those mannerisms that they had.
Oh, thank you.
That's why I hope, again, I know families are going to struggle this Halloween to find something fun. I think it would be such a neat idea to gather your family around, a fire or something and read some of these out loud, because they're so, I feel like that you want to read them out loud and speak them, because they just call for that.
They're completely unembellished. It's true. They're just stories that were told.
Do you think, I kind of brought this up about how people, think of this book as kind of a cult classic. Do you think that most people have had a ghost experience and just might not know it, or might not allow themselves to believe that they did?
You mean on Nantucket or anywhere?
Anywhere.
I'd say no, because when you have an experience, I mean, when you actually see something that you think is a person walking by, or a door opens by itself in front of you, or you hear footsteps, these experiences were very distinct and clear. And they were all much more than just a feeling. I think we've all had feelings at various times, especially when you walk into an older building. Once in a while, you just get that kind of a feeling like a dog's hackles rising on the, you just get, ooh. Yeah. So it's not that. I think, though, that this was fascinating to me when I was traveling a couple of years ago for Out of the Wild Night, which is all ghosts and really grew out of Nantucket Ghosts. At the end of my book talks with, say, an auditorium of people, I always, I couldn't wait for this part of it. At the end, I would say, could I ask all of you a question? And that question is, how many of you know somebody who has had an experience with ghosts? And at first, everything gets really quiet. And then usually, because my audience is younger people, so they would be, middle schoolers or high schoolers, hands would start going up until almost everybody had their hand up. And it turns out they either knew somebody or had somebody in their family who had had some kind of experience. And then at the back of the room with the faculty, if I was in a school or a library setting, adults then started putting their hands up. But everybody was tentative at first, except in New Orleans, hands shut.
Yeah, I can see that. Well, that's a perfect segue for the next book that I kind of really want to dive into, the Out of the Wild Night. You kind of hinted to this, but so was this book inspired by your work on Nantucket Ghosts, and that's what created this one?
Oh, very much so. And it's a book I wouldn't have been brave enough to write as a younger writer. There's so much about Nantucket that is ephemeral and spiritual. There's something about Nantucket that has a give and take, and almost everybody who lives there has a feeling that there might be a moment where the living and the dead are going to cross paths. It's just a feeling you get there, that the present tense isn't everything, right? I mean, almost everybody feels that way. There are moments, you know, where you're walking down Main Street in the dead of winter and it's, you know, snowing, or, you know, you're walking on a foggy night and you just feel like time is something watery almost. Time is something that moves around on Nantucket, which gives you access to things you might not have access to in another place. So I wanted to write about Nantucket and share some of that feeling in my heart about this amazing island. But I wasn't sure I wanted to write a piece of fiction that had ghost material in it. I wasn't sure how to do that. And then it sort of gradually fell into place and I was off and running.
I love your note at the end of Out of the Wild Night. You write, Nantucket is not just a location. There is a pulse, an awareness, perhaps a response. Why Nantucket has so many ghosts is anyone's guess, but I do know they're here. But do you have a guess of why?
There's an organization in New York called the American Society for Psychical Research. And in way back when, in the 80s, when I had these strange stories, at the time I still had family living in New York, and I took some of the stories to this place and said, could somebody read these? Do you think this is crazy? I mean, these are people telling me these stories. And the guy who read them said he was really interested. He said, actually, I have heard things about Nantucket before because we're an offshoot of the British organization and we do research. It was a very old fashioned, like funny old building. And so he said, you know, I think Nantucket has many similarities to islands off the coast of Britain in climate and in geography. There's a lot of water right under the surface on Nantucket. There's a lot of water in the atmosphere all the time. And there are some people, although there's no proof, who feel that a connection to paranormal communications, whatever you want to call them, is an electrical one. So if you're living in a very wet place, that could make that happen. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
Of course, nobody has figured out in a way that anyone in physics would accept what creates these experiences. But after listening to all the stories I've listened to, there is no doubt in my mind that this is part of life.
Is there do these Nantucket ghosts share any characteristics, or is there a common theme throughout all the stories that you've found, or not really?
No, there isn't a common theme, and that's part of what I loved. As I began collecting them, I thought, oh my gosh, am I going to have enough different material to put together a collection that'll be interesting and not repetitive? And yes, I mean, one story after another. Often it was sort of a household I was speaking with, you know, different people in a household. And then I would talk with somebody who'd lived in the house later. And the stories came together, but there was one variation after another. I mean, some of them had objects moving and footsteps and sort of physical things happening in the house. Others were figures that were seen, you know, passing quickly through doorways. Others seemed to be absolutely solid figures who walked through walls. And I mean, the variety of stories was extraordinary. And also the variety of people telling me the stories, I didn't expect at all. I mean, many were islanders, many were summer people. Clark Clifford's family, you know, he was part of the U.S. government under Kennedy, I think. But they had an amazing ghost story in their house. The Beinecke family had a ghost story. I mean, it just seemed to cross all different backgrounds and ages. Fascinating.
Yeah, definitely.
Really, really fascinating.
So Mary Chase is your ghost in Out of the Wild Night, and she actually existed. Can
Right.
you tell us how you found her, how you came about her, and then who was she?
Yeah, I saw a picture of her in the house she had lived in. I can't divulge whose house it is because, with that, people feel private.
Yeah.
But she, um, they had a picture of her taken probably in the 1880s or 90s, one of the wire photographs where people stood out in front of their houses. And she looked so compelling to me. And when I looked her up, there was nothing, there was really no information about her. But there she was, this little woman. It looked like she was missing a few teeth, but, you know, very forceful looking person. And so the story just began to wisp out of that image in my mind.
Wow. So just an image. That's all really you had.
Right.
Yeah.
And then all the stories that are sort of a part of me now that I've heard.
Yeah. Your language in Out of the Wild Night is, I feel like, very literary. It's why I never say that this is a children's book or when someone says what age this is, because I feel like it doesn't matter what it's kind of an ageless book. You can enjoy it at any age.
That's so great to hear. I was worried writing it because I knew it wasn't exactly a children's book.
Well, I mean, the language in it is, I mean, it's not, I wouldn't say it's simple. Like, it's not a simple, like, what you'd say, oh, this is a kid's book. So when everyone asks in the bookstore, like, oh, what age is this for? I'm like, I won't give an age because you can read it to your littles that can't even read yet. And I feel like someone's grandmother would really enjoy it.
That's great.
Do you consider yourself a children's author, or like, do you sit down to write a children's book, or do you just sit down to write a book?
I really just sit down to write a book. So I'm kind of weird that way. I know that. So I didn't, and it's interesting, all these years of, going to conferences and speaking with other people who are writing for children. Many people writing for children have approached it in a very businesslike way, and they've read their way through everything else being written at the time and looked for the place for themselves in the market. And so that is so not me. I mean, I just get a spark in my imagination, and then things build around it. And as I'm writing, I loved being a teacher, working with children. I loved seeing children's excitement. But even as a teacher, I always wanted to give them ideas and experiences that could appeal to anyone who was curious. And for me, always, the most exciting uh, questions are rooted in the real world. So ghosts, I mean, I think finally with Out of the Wild Night, my mysteries really got close to the biggest mystery, which is what's going on when you see a ghost. What is this? What is this? What's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
So for me as a teacher and then as a writer, I was writing about things that I loved thinking about and that other adults I knew loved thinking about. So sometimes it was big art ideas, like in Chasing Vermeer. I know people said to me at first, oh, you can't possibly write about a Vermeer painting for children because they won't be interested. It's just a face. And I thought, I just don't know about that. So, I mean, if you give children a big question that adults around them haven't been able to solve, you will have all of their brain power and all of their interest. And I love the idea that the biggest questions in life can be for any age. And that's really where my books have come from. I am a curious, very curious person, and I love that feeling of grappling with a question that nobody understands.
Mm-hmm.
And I've loved that all my life. So I think that's where my books come from, but it makes them hard to classify.
Well,
I
and also
think
describes.
there was an adult book in some translations. So and same thing with some of the other ones. They've gone into many languages and they're not always children's books. So they're odd.
It's interesting that you say that's how you kind of tackle any work you're working on, because ghosts really are it's the epitome of the thing that, science is never going to prove them right, but so many people believe that they exist. So it's no wonder that you have ghosts in your literary canon.
It's ultimate squeezing lemon on your brain feeling.
Yes.
Like, could that be? Yeah.
You describe Nantucket as a dictionary for the spirit, which I love that.
Oh, thank you.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
I think there is something on Nantucket that feeds all sides of the human spirit. And that there are things you can take from Nantucket that sort of elucidate feelings that we all have and things that are hard to figure out. There's something, people often describe it as something healing or restoring about Nantucket, but I think actually Nantucket just, it has something rather magical in its deep spirit. And that's the side of it that's the undisturbed side, clearly, not the more modern side. But there is something about that island that if you are quiet enough and pay close enough attention, it will speak to whatever you need, I think. So in that sense, it's packed with information and offerings that can make your world bigger. Mm-hmm. So that's what a dictionary does too.
Yeah, I very much agree. You've written many books, and for those who only know the Nantucket ones, like Nantucket Ghosts or Out of the Wild Night, are there other books that you'd strongly recommend that you feel are for all ages and you'd like people to pick up, maybe if they don't know of it?
Yeah, all my mysteries are, each one is a standalone. I've got to say, each one grew out of a major thing that I was curious and excited about, and I wanted to share. So I never write anything unless I have a bundle of things in my mind that have been rolling around, sometimes for years, and I just want to, I'm very excited about it. I just want to share it. So in that way, I think they're all sort of for any age, and I hear that from people who've written me too. But the book Hold Fast, which is set, all of the characters are set in a shelter in Chicago that I wrote a few years ago, is to me very definitely a book for any age. And it was an extraordinary book that came out of experiences. I spent a lot of time in shelters in Chicago, and I decided that I was lucky enough to be somebody who had, a publisher waiting for a book, and I knew that whatever I made would get out there, and I would have an audience, and I have a voice. So I thought, okay, I'm dying to write a book and make these kids less invisible, because in our system they often are invisible. So that's where Hold Fast came from. And that was an amazing book for me to write. I felt like it completely changed my life in a hard way. I mean, boy, homelessness is very serious. But I think throughout all of my writings, I've explored the power of home in one way or another. I hadn't intended to do that, but
it happened. Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Do you think most authors have something like that they finish a book and they're like, it always comes back to this one thing, and maybe that is their deeper intention, that they don't even realize that that's what they're always kind of writing about?
I think it's true. I know Ann Patchett has said that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think often you're puzzling over something yourself, or you're coming back and back to something that feels deeply meaningful, and so it pops up in different forms. And
I mean, even because do you have similar sentiments of Nantucket to Chicago? Like, do you have those same types of feelings of home there?
We came to Chicago because of my husband Bill's job. We knew nothing about it. And we were lucky enough to land in a small neighborhood. So I think I turned, and our kids were growing up there. I turned that neighborhood into my town. But uh, honestly, Nantucket is deeply our
Yeah.
base in the world. Yeah.
I also really adore your name, Blue. I mean, I've never met a Blue. Can you tell me the origin of that? And was that your given name? I think I actually have asked you this before, but I want it for everyone who's listening.
It was a nickname for Elizabeth. So I've had it since I was 2 days old. And I imagine the other kids in the family have normal names. So I imagine it wasn't meant to stick, but it did.
Yeah,
So here I am.
I just love it. It's one of my favorite names on a spine. Like even before I had met you, I was just like, I need to know this Blue Balliett.
That's nice.
Okay, so now this is my favorite thing to do with authors. I call it the speed round.
Yeah.
Where I ask you literary questions and some other ones. So are you all ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Favorite book as a kid?
The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frank Weiler, which is set in New York City where I was growing up, and it's a mystery, and the first one I'd ever read that had really exciting ideas about the real world. I think it seeped into my head and never left.
Yeah, sounds like it. Favorite novel?
It could be A Movable Feast. It's not a novel, it's a collection of stories, but I feel like I've gone back to it again and again. And I have to say again, I love this whole list of little questions you sent me, and I made notes and then I've lost them all. So I'll do the best I can.
No problem. Favorite nonfiction?
It might be the book Low by Charles Fort. I pulled it out because it's just amazing looking. It came from the Athenaeum around 1980. It was being discarded by the library, and it's a 1931 edition, and it's crazy accounts of impossible things happening all over the world, and that went into Chasing Vermeer.
Favorite literary quote?
I always love that one of Picasso's, that art is a lie that tells the truth. I mean, he wrote it in Spanish, but and Degas also, again, not in English, but he said something wonderful about art, that art is not about what you see, it's about what you make others see. That's where the art is.
Yeah.
So in other words, I love that sense that art is something collaborative, the experience of art, no matter what.
I love that. A book that made you laugh the loudest?
There have been many. So maybe P.G. Wodehouse, depending on your mood, can be pretty funny. But also parts of Amy Tan's writings and Elizabeth Strout's can be, I mean, they're sort of painful funny, but they are very funny.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a book that made you cry the hardest?
A book that made me cry the hardest? Oh gosh, I mean, yeah, I've read many sad books. Grapes of Wrath was a toughie. Mm-hmm. That's very moving.
Do you have a favorite mystery?
I would say Tana French's In the Woods. Her first book was. Yep. I love her work. I've been following her work. You have the new one?
All up there. Yeah, I have the new one. I haven't started it yet, but.
Oh, I haven't read it yet. Yeah. Okay.
It's a standalone, so it's not like the Dublin ones, and the Witch Elm was a standalone. But this one, it sounds really good.
Cool.
Okay, so what is, and this is just for fun, your stage name? So it's your first pet and then the street you grew up
on. Okay. I love this question. This is so funny. So my first pet would have been probably Periwinkle, who was a hamster. And the street was 98th Street. I grew up on 98th Street in New York City. So it would be Periwinkle 98.
Look at that. I would go to that show, Periwinkle
I'll,
98.
I'll be all ready when they come calling.
If you ever need another author name, I think that would also look really good on the book show.
Right.
Favorite place? I think I probably know your answer, but
It's Nantucket.
favorite scary story?
Um, I'm a big fan of Shirley Jackson's. She weaves a terrifying story. I think The Lottery I read in high school. That is a really creepy story. And then The Haunting of Hill House, the novel, is really scary.
Okay. Yeah,
She's
I'm gonna look.
understated and she writes beautifully and she's terrifying.
Do you have a favorite scary movie?
Yeah, I think again, the old version of The Haunting of Hill House is really good. The one that has Julie Harris in it.
Okay.
Oh, so frightening. You're going to end up jumping straight up off a sofa cushion. There's some really scary parts.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna try and read that next week and watch the movie. That sounds like my plan.
Cool.
What are you reading right now?
Something that either came from Hospital Thrift or might have come from the dump where I found many, many treasures. No reflection on the book. It's a novel by Nathaniel Benchley called A Winter's Tale, written in '64, set in the off season. And it's just delightful and funny and totally enjoying it.
Nice.
Yeah.
And are you writing anything right now?
I have the starts of two different versions of the same story. And quite honestly, I'm a little confused about what I'm doing with them or what age I'm supposed to write for. And my editor, and I know that these aren't children's books, but at the same time, there's a side to me that's had such an easy path with Scholastic because my editor has been David Levithan, who has always said, oh my God, do whatever you want. And I keep saying, tell me if this is too wild or if this is not a children's book or whatever. And he's just sort of always given me this carte blanche and sort of been very supportive. So I'm confused about what I'm doing, but I definitely have a story there.
Have you found it difficult to write this year? I feel like
I think it's been a scattered year. Yeah, I think many of us are feeling sort of we're dislocated. We're worried about other people often. It's a confusing year. I find I don't have that same pool of accessible, sort of peaceful quiet at my desk that I usually do.
Yeah, I've had a pretty rough reading year as far as being able to get into books because my mind will just go away. Or even you mentioned sneezing. If I see people or I'm reading about people in a group, I'm like, what are they doing in a group and where are their masks? And then you're kind of like, oh wow, I need to get back. So it's kind of all this pandemic and this year has just kind of been all consuming, and it just kind of has ruined some of my things that used to be my safe place in a way.
I think that's true for many, many, many of us. We've been sort of, distracted in a really unpleasant way.
Yeah. Well, Blue, I want to thank you so much. And I want everyone listening to go pick up a copy of Nantucket Ghosts or pick up a copy of Out of the Wild Night, because I think it's a great way to spend a Nantucket or really anywhere Halloween next week. And I just wanted to say thank you again, Blue. I really appreciate it. And I hope to see you back on, because you're in Chicago, right?
Yeah, just for a little while, just visiting grown children.
Yes. How is family right now?
Good. I mean, I think everybody's very tired of being closed in their little corners. It's hard. It's a crazy time, but we'll all evolve and get through it. I have faith.
Yes. Well, happy Halloween to the Queen.
Happy Halloween to you, and happy reading to everybody who jumps into the ghosts. And please know that there are other ghosts out there on the island. They haven't all been written about yet, And so who knows where reading these stories will take you.
Agreed. Well, smile for the camera so I have a picture.
Okay.
Thanks, Blue. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.